All right, today you're about to get one of the most alpha-packed videos I've ever dropped on the channel. I'm going to show you the exact framework for the altcoins that you should be holding. If an altcoin does not fit these criteria, then you should probably consider exiting it from your portfolio. And if you're researching a new altcoin and considering to add it to your portfolio, whether it's a short to mid-term trade or a long-term portfolio add, this framework is going to make that decision much easier and help you with the sizing of that position. I'm going to run you through my full checklist whenever I'm buying an altcoin, and a checklist that you can retroactively use to go through altcoins that you currently hold to make decisions on whether to hold them or not. Because for this entire cycle, we've clearly seen a massive divide in the coins that are outperforming versus underperforming. And we're kind of in a market at the moment where you see these sector rotations and you see specific narratives performing really well, but the overall trend for altcoins has been to go down and bleed against Bitcoin. So using this video, you can ensure that you are only positioned in the coins and only concentrate liquidity into the coins which are likely going to outperform the rest of the market and give you the best possible chance of outperforming Bitcoin. As you can see in front of you, I think the way to think of this market is it's probably going to be a K-shaped recovery. So I'm still in the camp that I believe Bitcoin is going to have another big leg to the upside. And if that's the case, clearly there is going to be speculation on altcoins. And if that's the case, clearly there is going to be some speculation on altcoins. But you want to make sure you're positioned in the right stuff. So when this recovery does happen, you're not holding coins from this orange category, the dead sectors, overvalued infrastructure, coins with unlocks and garbage, and instead you're holding strong coins. And Taiki just says coins with buybacks here, but it's a lot deeper than that. My framework goes a lot deeper and is actually going to show you hands-on today how you can analyze altcoins. I'm going to show you some tips that I've never shared before, analyzing smart money on coins, analyzing whale wallets to spot alpha, how you can actually analyze flows. I've got an AI prompt that I'm going to share with you today that I've been using on Grok to analyze altcoins that significantly sped up my token research. And that prompt you can literally rinse and repeat when analyzing any altcoin, and it's instantly going to put you ahead of the curve because I still don't think people are using AI to analyze crypto properly. So if you like this type of content, super educational, analytical, and practical, we're going to go through a bunch of charts as well. Make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the post notification bell. I feel like this video is a bit of a return to my roots because I came up doing a lot of this analytical content. Obviously, when the markets are crazy, we cover the more narrative and market-based stuff. But today, I think you're really going to get the alpha here. So without further ado, this is my research checklist. So what we're going to do in today's video is we're going to go through each element of an altcoin which constitutes a good altcoin or a bad altcoin to hold. So we've divided it up into categories. Technicals, which we're going to start with. So what are the technical structures for altcoins that you should be holding and bidding? And what are the structures that you should either de-risk or look to avoid? Then we're going to get into positive flows because we know it's a flow-based market. The altcoins with the best flows, so the ones with increasing whale activity, smart money, strong bridge inflows, more buys than there are sells, lack of unlocks, lack of sell pressure. These are going to be the better holds. And I think a lot of people, frankly, are lazy. They don't really do their research when it comes to working out whether an altcoin has unlocks and has negative or positive flows. But there are some really easy tools you can use to simply work out whether there's going to be a lot of dilution for a coin or whether there is likely to be net buy pressure. And then we're going to go into other criteria, which are a bit more arbitrary, but you need to go through the flows and the technical side of things before you can work out how to position size. I mean, how are you supposed to work out your conviction level on entering a position, thus to come up with your position sizing if you don't have an understanding of the project or at least the underlying technicals behind the project? So without further ado, let's get straight into things here. The first thing that you need to be doing when holding or buying an altcoin in this market is charting it versus Bitcoin. Now, there are two scenarios for adding an altcoin in this market versus Bitcoin. You can either buy an altcoin chart that is in an uptrend versus Bitcoin, depending on the time frame of the hold. So if it is a multi-month hold, you would look at the weekly chart, for example. If it's just a multi-week like swing trade, you would potentially look at the H4 and daily chart for that altcoin. But ultimately, you want to make sure that altcoin is in an uptrend against Bitcoin, because at the end of the day, you need to be outperforming Bitcoin. Now, you might say to me, okay, but most altcoins are down against Bitcoin at the moment, and there are some good opportunities when the market rotates. So things aren't always in an uptrend. Sometimes things go through downtrends and then they reverse. 100% true. And that's why it's not just about a coin being in an uptrend versus Bitcoin. It's also about a coin having a major support level for you to at least have an invalidation, where if it breaks that level, at least you've got some sort of recourse to swing back into a Bitcoin position or potentially use that as confluence to go back into a stablecoin position. The problem is if you're getting into an altcoin that's making lower lows versus Bitcoin, that is not a place you want to be in. So let's give some practical examples. I'll start with SUI. You can see SUI BTC actually looks like it's breaking down. As you can see here, it broke below a major level, which has been a major level of resistance in the past and also support in the recent chart. However, if you look at the SUI US dollar chart, it is coming down to support. So purely against US dollar, you would say this is a buy, but the problem with potentially buying here is the fact that it's just broken down on the SUI BTC chart. So with a token like this, what I would prefer to do is wait for a reclaim versus Bitcoin. And yes, this might mean, you missed the floor, but the microstructure will likely be better. The other thing you could do is you could wait for it to put in a local floor versus Bitcoin before entering. So we know there's a significant area of interest around this zone here. And it really depends on how you draw these things. But this entire zone is interest. We see that we've had many reactions around the 1.4 level for a while. If it came down and filled this level, which would be in the 70 to 80 cent cluster down here, then that could potentially be an entry trigger. Let's go through a few more examples. Sol BTC. So as I mentioned, there are two ways to determine whether a coin is in a good trend versus Bitcoin or is worth holding versus Bitcoin. It either has to be in an uptrending environment or it has to be having a major high time frame retest. So from 2023 to 2024, Sol BTC was in an uptrending environment. So you can use a moving average like the noodle, and you can run a consolidation strategy where wherever it forms these bases, you can look to accumulate off the lows. So you can have the noodle or a moving average in confluence with, retests of local range lows. So basically every time the token comes up and consolidates or dips, you accumulate and you can have your stop set below the prior low. This makes it very easy because if a token's in an uptrend versus Bitcoin, you basically just keep buying it and then you look for confluence versus the US dollar chart. And this is a good place to be because you want to be outperforming Bitcoin. So that is an example of an uptrend. The problem is Solana right now is not in an uptrend if we go to the weekly because, Solana is likely a higher time frame hold for most people. You can see that it's in a downtrend. Now, you could argue that it's shifted back into a micro uptrend for a little bit. So if you were trading on the lower time frames, so the H4, there was definitely a swing trading opportunity on Solana to, trade this uptrend versus Bitcoin. However, that has now run its course and we have seen the chart reverse back into bearish trend territory. So with a coin like this, if it's not in an uptrend and it is in a macro downtrend, which technically it is because you do have lower highs, you have the high here, you have a lower high, you have a lower high, and you do have lower lows, although this could be a low time frame reversal, that wouldn't be confirmed until you had a higher low above here. Then, if we made a low above here, then you could maybe call this a reverse of structure. However, it's not a reversal until we actually get back above this level. And actually for now, it does look like it wants to come back down and revisit these lows. So with Sol BTC, if you wanted to bid, you would probably only want to bid the lows. So in this zone here, which is a retest of this zone. And the reason why you want to bid the lows instead of here, you might say, oh, but it doesn't really matter. I'd rather just get an entry here. The only issue with that is the invalidation piece. So especially because Sol USD is just in one big range and it's kind of hard to trade, as you can see, you are going to have a really hard time invalidating if the trade goes against you. So the main reason why you want to use technicals to pair with a fundamental thesis, and we're going to get through the fundamental thesis and the way to construct your theses for coins in a couple of minutes here. The problem is if you don't have technicals to pair with that, you are running the risk of having no risk management on the trade, because what can happen is Sol can come down and test that level. That's very normal, but you could be 18% out of pocket versus Bitcoin. And then if you have that in confluence with the Sol USD chart, you're now 25% down versus Bitcoin. So it's hard for me to say I'd be comfortable buying Solana here, considering the technical stop for this is like 20% away. And I don't want to be catching a knife being 20% underwater. I would rather honestly do one of two things. One, wait for a sweep of this zone and see the reaction, potentially look to get in, and there should be confluence with the USD pair as well. Or Secondly, wait for a confirmed reversal and a shift of structure, so a higher low structure to look to get back in, and then target the swing highs. But I don't really want to be diddling in the middle when it comes to a lot of majors in the market right now. So that is the first criteria. Is the Bitcoin chart in an uptrend, or is it at major support? You're going to have a much better time buying at major support, or conversely, as I showed you before, buying a coin if it's in an uptrend, and you could cycle down to the lower time frames to work out whether there is a good entry in terms of consolidation structure. The other thing you want to pay attention to is the Bitcoin dominance uptrend in general, because generally speaking, you are better off getting into altcoins when Bitcoin dominance is in a downtrend, and then using confluence with specific altcoin BTC pairs in order to work out whether something's a good entry. The problem is if dominance is in an uptrend like it is, then you are fighting against the tide a little bit. Now, this could actually be a rejection zone. That could be a lower high shift of structure for dominance. The only issue is if you go into the monthly chart, it does look like it wants to go higher. And like if I had to bet right now, I would say that it's probably going to take out these highs or at least come close. So there's a little bit more, I think, steam left in the dominance trend, roughly 8% before maybe you get a reversal. And this is in line with macro flows in general. Like the market's reset after the 10th of October, there was a complete leverage reset. Likely what needs to happen for the next leg for altcoins is Bitcoin needs to have a big leg to the upside before liquidity starts to filter back into altcoins. And the macro trend of the market likely needs to be triggered by some sort of catalyst for Bitcoin, because we've had a bit of a hangover period now of the DAT buying that was really strong, but now the buying has kind of dried up. So the market's in the hangover phase, essentially, like waiting for another catalyst to renew life and optimism back into Bitcoin. And that's likely going to be the next trigger for the next altcoin run. So looking at the market through that lens, you can kind of assert, all right, balance of probabilities, unless there's some specific altcoin trigger, which is probably unlikely, then dominance is probably going to go higher. So under that assumption, I'm looking at lower targets on my BTC alt pairs. So you've kind of got to think of the market holistically. Like altcoin charts aren't in a vacuum. And I think you can get cut up a little bit by looking at specific altcoin charts without being aware of the overall trend. Of course, there are outliers. Like right now, ZEC is absolutely flying, ZEC, Zcash, and that one really is a good one to trade at the moment, but it's one of the outliers. Like there are hundreds of coins which aren't so good to trade because of the overall trend of the market. So that are the Bitcoin pairs. The other thing you want to do is use Bitcoin in confluence with the USD pairing on a coin. Generally speaking, you want to be bidding high time frame levels. You don't want to be bidding coins either in a downtrend or coins that are making lower lows. Like I probably wouldn't bid Arbitrum right now, for example, because it's making lower highs and lower lows, and this is the major pivot level. And then you also have, the moving average acting as resistance, and you have like a big gap below on this liquidation wick. Probably not one you want to buy. EIGEN, this is one where I recently had to invalidate because I took a position at around $1, but I was forced to cut, as I shared the other day in my Discord, because it broke below a key level, which was the key $1 psychological level. So with something like EIGEN, I'd be much more comfortable just waiting for a reclaim. I'm just going to let this chop play out. And if we get a reclaim, then I'll look at playing, the reclaim play to the upside. And that would likely also be happening with Bitcoin improving. What I don't want to do is be catching a knife all the way down to the bottom of this liquidation wick, because that puts me in negative territory. Yes, you might make the argument, but you just average out your cost basis, but you're averaging your cost basis down 35%. Maybe it's just better waiting for an uptrend and paying the premium of confirmation. So the premium of confirmation means you might have to buy slightly higher than the lows, but for example, if there's a low time frame structure shift on Bitcoin, and then we're like, okay, we want to start bidding altcoins because there's been a structure shift on Bitcoin, then maybe you want to wait for that to play out, and then the structure shifts around here, and then you can even get in here on the reversal on the low time frame. Even though it's not a full reclaim, we might say, okay, Bitcoin looks good. It's reclaimed to 108. It's showing, a shift of structure. There's good catalyst for the market. Let's get into some altcoin positions. But at least you're getting in here on confirmation. You didn't get the low at 48 cents. You're buying it at 62 cents, but you have a much better idea of where the market is. And that entry price is still lower than where it is now. So with downtrending price action, generally you want to wait for an altcoin to find a floor and then get in on an uptrend rather than trying to catch a knife. It's a similar story with SPX right now. And I could show a lot of coins in the market, to be honest. Like a lot of coins are in a downtrend, but this is another one where you have that key psychological level at $1, which is, really, really key for SPX that it lost. It would have been your invalidation if it broke down from this level, but B, you probably wouldn't be looking at an entry until you either reclaim this level or there was a structure shift on the low time frames which compelled you to enter, but that's not the case with SPX. So I think ultimately number 2 here comes down to making sure you're not catching a falling knife and making sure you're aware of the key high time frame levels that need to be reclaimed in order for a validation on your entry. It's very important, I think, to use technicals in this market, not because, they tell the full picture or not because I think it's a magic crystal ball. Like, I actually more so believe in the fundamental side of trading, but the technicals for me are risk management devices. They make sure that I have an invalidation to invalidate my fundamental trade because unfortunately, or fortunately, because you can use this in both ways, it's a market of momentum, it's a market of flows. And even if the fundamentals for a coin are positive, if there's no liquidity inflow into that coin, you'll still lose money. So having some sort of preventative technical measure at least prevents against that. And getting in on certain validation zones, for example, a reclaim of a high time frame trend on a consolidation, versus the Bitcoin pair. These are good because you can actually risk manage and you have at least your prior lows that you can invalidate if they get taken out. Now, it might mean sometimes you need to re-enter a position twice just to get the right entry, but that is the cost that you pay to have decent risk management in the market. And at least this way, you will avoid against like 50, 60, 70% drawdown. So you'll protect yourself. So that is a quick rundown of the technical side, but now we get into really what drives markets from a fundamental point of view. And this is where I think there's a lot of discrepancies and the big gains come for altcoins. And this is monitoring flows. So to break it down simply, the altcoin market is a game of flows, aka is there more buy pressure than there is sell pressure? And if that is the case, then you will see over time token price going up if all things are constant. And then there's obviously liquidity flows for the macro market, which affect the market. So they work together, but generally speaking, if you can tick off all of these boxes, you should be in a much better position. Even if the altcoin is going down, by the way, at least altcoins that tick these boxes will go down less than other coins. So you'll outperform. So what I recommend is after doing this video, go through your own portfolio. It's a bit of weekend homework for you, but go through your own portfolio, do the exercise we're about to do now for each one of your holdings. And if your altcoins start to fail the test, maybe find altcoins which will pass the test a little bit better. Now, obviously this is not financial advice because this is purely subjective. I've put these things together. There might be things that you value more in the market that you think impact price action more. That's totally okay. But I think it's just about being aware of these things so you can make better decisions about opportunity cost and what to hold. So let's go through them. The first thing when it comes to buying or holding an altcoin that you want to analyze is the ecosystem. Does the broader ecosystem from a macro point of view have inflows or outflows? I'm going to give you a website for each of these things, by the way. The website that I use is dBridge. So if it's an altcoin in the BNB ecosystem, you want to look, is BNB leaking or gaining over the past 7 days, 30 days, and the last 3 months? If it's in the Solana ecosystem, you want to do the same exercise. Base ecosystem, same exercise. Ethereum ecosystem, same exercise. It's not a foolproof measure because I know a lot of coins are multi-chain, so not every coin has one chain where there's super central liquidity, apart from like a lot of the Ethereum coins, for example. But I think it's still relevant to look at where a pair has the most liquidity and then tracking how it is performing in terms of an overall ecosystem. So that's a quick scan you want to make. For example, if you are in AERO as the top base play, you generally want to work out whether base has massive inflows or massive outflows. Looking at it here, it's relatively neutral over the 3-month time frame. So there's no clear trend. Over a 30-day time frame, it's actually positive. So there's net liquidity inflows into the ecosystem. And over a 7-day trend, it's also relatively flat. So I think what you're looking to do, and you can add more chains here, by the way, I've just selected a few. I think what you're looking to do is not only make sure there are liquidity inflows, but also eradicate the possibility of outflows. Like if base was constantly outflowing, that's probably a bad sign, which could potentially jeopardize your thesis on AERO, for example. But not all of these need to be a yes. So let's say, you're going through your coin, it's in an uptrend versus Bitcoin, or it's at major support or nearing major support. So it's yes. It looks decent versus the USD chart. So it's not making lower lows. It's still at or above a high time frame level. So that gets a yes. Then, if this one's a no, it doesn't mean that the whole thesis is blown up. You can actually create your own weightings to work out how you would rate an altcoin. So a few of these can be no, but as long as the majority are yes, your altcoin's in a better position, because rarely is every altcoin going to get a resounding yes. Sometimes you'll have no's or question marks or, neutral. I'm just doing yes or no for the example of this video, but there are some things which could be neutral. Like it might not be increasing user activity, but it might be holding in a down market, which you might view as a net positive. So you might give it, a positive or a neutral score. So that is bridge inflows and how to track them. The next one is whale activity. So there are two websites for this that I like. I honestly think Nansen is the best, but it is paid. So if you go onto a coin, so for example, we are on AERO, and you go onto the holders tab here. I'm not actually logged in right now because I'm on my other computer, but on the computer where I'm logged in, you'll see a smart money score. So it will show you how much smart money owns the coin. And the one I like a lot is the whale tab. So if you click on the whale tab, you can see overall, is whale interest increasing or decreasing? Whale interest increasing, and there's different time frames, is generally a reflection of smart money or big money positioning. And if you see whales actively exiting, that is usually not a very good sign, because often these whales know something that we don't. Not always, some of them are just big holders who are offloading, but there have been a lot of plays in the market. For example, the Asta play, one of the reasons I spotted that is because a lot of whales were buying in the early days, and a lot of smart money also was interested in accumulating. And you can track this on Arkham as well. I think Nansen is the best if you can pay. If not, there is a website called Moby Screener where you can also go into a coin. So this is Trump USD, for example, and you can click on whale watch data, and you can get all the data behind big buys or sells for the coin. So it's a little bit more manual, because then you need to go through the entire list over the time frame that you want, but you can still get a bit of an idea as to what's happening in terms of the whales there. And you can also look at holder concentration, go into their wallets and see whether they are net buyers or net sellers. So Moby Screen is good. And then there's a tip I want to give you on Nansen. If you scroll down to AI signals or smart alerts, the smart alerts section in particular, you can create your own AI-powered smart alerts. So if you're logged in, what you're able to do is say, okay, I want to track smart money inflow over 500K in a 24-hour period into a coin, and then it will automatically flag coins to you that are gaining significant traction in terms of actual money coming in, because in the crypto markets, there's narrative inflow, so there's lots of people like talking about a coin, and then there's actual smart money inflow, which is, I think, a bit more important fundamentally, because it actually shows you that liquidity is flowing into a coin, and it's not just talk about a coin, because talk about a coin can be easily manipulated by incentives, but smart money inflow tells you a bit more of a pure story. So you can set all of your own smart alerts to literally go to your mobile phone on specific coins as well. Like if you're holding a big position, let's say in Hyperliquid, and you want to be alerted if a big whale exits, because that might affect your thesis a little bit, then you can actually put on smart alerts. So that is a feature that recently rolled out that I've been experimenting with, and I'm probably going to build some more. Unfortunately, it is paid though, but there are workarounds. You can build your own, you can develop Telegram bots and all sorts of stuff. But I thought I would still suggest this one for the ones that can afford it. But the good news is there are also lots of free sites you can use to do this, and we'll get into some now as well. So that's whale activity, that's smart money. The next thing you can do is combine the actual liquidity flow with, as I mentioned before, sentiment flow. Sentiment flow is also an important thing to look at. So, for example, change in Mindshare, change in sentiment, because that can signal to you whether there's been a shift that isn't reflecting in price. So what you can do is you can go onto Cookie. This is the website that I do it on. You can go through and you can look at the change in sentiment for altcoins. For example, Zcash has been super hot recently, and you can see the change in sentiment and Mindshare. Like if you go onto a higher time frame period, you'll see that before the big rally began, there was actually a significant uptick that began in both Mindshare and sentiment. Sentiment typically leads Mindshare, which is more of a lagging indicator that builds up. The sentiment score and the swing in the sentiment score can potentially be an entry trigger for you, or at least a trigger to look further into a narrative, because an altcoin is starting to gain momentum. And on Cookie, you also have the feed, the smart feed, where you can look at all the data behind a coin and the major posters behind a coin and see who's actually driving the narrative. So this is a very good screener that I pretty much use every single day. It's also got news built in. So that is a place that you can use to validate whether there are early signs of narrative traction. You've also got Kaito, but I personally prefer Cookie. The next thing that you can do is dig into the underlying metrics. So we've looked at liquidity flow. We've looked at narrative flow. So these are the main two things that you want to check off first. Now we want to go into the micro details. So TVL, DEX volume, revenue, and then I'm going to give you my prompt that goes through unlocks, token sinks, buybacks, which is a very important place to look when you want to fully evaluate the picture of whether a coin has negative flows or whether a coin overall has positive flows. Growing TVL is simple because you can go onto DeFi Llama. I think a lot of you are familiar with it, but this is pretty much my go-to. When I want to research a coin, I want to see whether TVL is growing. Look, this is not the be-all and end-all, but it just gives you an idea behind whether at least liquidity is growing in an ecosystem or whether liquidity is shrinking in an ecosystem. The next thing you can look at also in DeFi Llama is user activity / DEX volume. However, I do find if there is a custom June dashboard for a coin, I prefer the granular statistics that I get from that. So obviously on DeFi Llama, you have your DEX volume, your earnings. You can click on it. You can look at the pace of the growth. For example, if you click on add metrics, you can actually add the revenue and the volume, and you can see on DeFi Llama directly how the volume is tracking. This is my go-to for basic data. But if I want something a bit more granular and I want to dive deep into things, for example, how long users stay on the platform, user activity, monthly users, daily users, I'll go into June Analytics because funds and individuals can build their custom scripts, which can give you more granular insights. So for something like Hyperliquid, you can look at whether volume is rising or dropping. You can look at the cumulative amount of traders and users. You can look at the total amount of volume, the average volume per user, the amount that's being liquidated. And this is just Hyperliquid. But if you use the search bar, you can look it up for any coin. Like you can go into an Ethereum scanner, so Ethereum NFT market, Ethereum L2 staking, like the world's your oyster on this. You can look at pretty much anything like AI, for example. There's an AI narrative dashboard screener, which goes through all of the AI projects in the market and has all of the breakdowns in that sector. And if you just click search, then you can go through and you can look at which data sets you like the most. So there's, the overall AI dashboard, but there are also specific ones for different protocols. There's, one for virtuals, and you can go and see the ones you like. Not all of them are always updated, but typically if something has more stars, it's more of an active database. Not always, but for the most part. So that's how I can go into the details for user activities and DEX volume. Now for revenue and fees, you can use June, you can use DeFi Llama, but I wanted to throw one more into the mix, and that is Token Terminal, because you actually can get full financial statements for coins. So if you go to the Explorer, you can look at all of the details in one place. Like there is a lot of overlap, by the way, between some of these sites, but I do like having the option to have different breakdowns because some have different metrics. For example, on Ethereum, you can actually look at their full financial statement, which gives you all the details, pretty much like an accountant would, on the expenses, the revenue, supply side fees. So this is like a nice way to visualize it as well if you don't like graphs, if you just want to look at the pure numbers. And then obviously as a bonus, you can actually screenshot this and send it to Grok or another LLM or ChatGPT or Claude, wherever you have a model built. I'm working on some frameworks for that for you guys, specifically on Claude, but you can get even more insights through doing it that way. So I wanted to throw Token Terminal in the mix as well. A lot of these have paid variations, but there is a lot of information for free as well. Now, for the final three, I want to use an AI prompt because I did develop a prompt, which you're going to see here, which can give you the overall scope of the flows for that coin, the tokenomics for that coin, any sell pressure for that coin, partnerships, and anything to be aware of, negatives and positives. So you just want to replace the token name with something. For example, we're just going to use Ethereum for the example of this. So I'm just going to run the prompts now for ETH. It's going to take probably a couple of minutes. Also, if you want to use Grok Heavy and you've got the paid subscription, you can get a much more granular overview. What I want to say while this is loading is that I would not rely on this 100%. I do find a lot of the information is accurate when I cross-check it, but it shouldn't be your only source of information. It's just very good to save time and get a full scope of unlocks, on-chain metrics, positive, negative flows, because there are some things which might be available in news outlets or in the X data that aren't available just by looking at the data. So it will contextualize things more for you. Obviously, though, you want to double check things. So before making an investment decision based on something, you want to try and find a primary source. That's why in this prompt, I've also asked it to identify the white paper. So you can actually look at the tokenomic structure. But of course, there's new information which comes to light, which makes white papers not always accurate because tokenomics change, roadmaps change, and unless there's an updated white paper, usually it's in the form of like a new post or amendment or article, then that information's not going to be there. So that's where AI has made things a lot easier. So in this prompt, you can see it's very detailed. It goes through what Ethereum is, the analysis, some of the data. It goes through unlocks, vesting schedules, utility, positive flows, negative flows. I think this is the most important bit. Just understanding where a token is at in terms of positive and negative flows, and then overall assessment and risks. What I'm going to do is I'm going to leave the full prompt in my Telegram below. So if you want to join my free Telegram, click the link in the description below, and you can get the full thing there. And I'll also drop this spreadsheet in my Telegram below as well. And if you want more insight into the token unlocks side of things specifically, obviously we got some information in terms of unlocks on Grok, but if you want to look at the charts and visualize it and verify it, Tokenomists has a lot of unlock data as well that you can go through, and you can look at the vesting schedules for altcoins. I also like this because it doesn't just tell us a specific altcoin we're researching, but it also shows us the overall broader cliff unlocks in certain periods for the market overall. So we can see over the next 7 days, there's a fair bit of Aptos, Linear, there's some AVAX, and you can look at percentage unlocked across the entire crypto market to look at which coins are likely going to have the biggest unlocks. This can also help you to find shorting or buying opportunities, but there are so many factors in terms of execution which go into that. But it is a variable that you can look into. So this exercise, which will definitely take you like 15 minutes to fully digest for a coin, will take you through the final 3 elements of the flows to work out whether there are positive flows or not for the altcoin. So at this stage, you should have an idea of the technicals. You should have a good idea of the fundamentals. I think the last thing that you want to work out is, do they have a strong team? Because obviously there needs to be a really strong team behind a token to execute well on the vision. B, is it in a strong narrative that is likely to see inflows overall, not just the specific token? And also, do you actually understand the project? Because if you don't understand the thesis, even if it's just a technical thesis, that's fine, right? But if you don't understand the exact thesis behind entering a coin, then it's going to be extremely difficult to hold the coin through turbulence. So even if you've done all this research, by the end of it, if you still don't really understand it, or if it's too complex, or if you don't really know what you're doing on the technical side, then you probably don't want to enter the position purely based on the fact that if the market does keep bleeding, or you're at a point where you hit your invalidation and you're forced to actually sell, or you're at a point where you're forced to buy but you don't have the conviction to buy, then it's going to be really hard to actually size that position properly. So it's probably not worth buying at all. But if you do understand the project through this research exercise, which you probably should by the end of it, then you're in a much better position to take a punt. And then finally, the position sizing. This is obviously a personal thing, but the number one thing when it comes to entering altcoins is making sure that you size them correctly. If you oversize a bad trade, it can really hurt your portfolio. And if you undersize a strong trade, you can not benefit from the full run of that altcoin, because if you only allocated 1% to something you should have allocated 5% to, then you did yourself a real disservice. And in the overall market, it's these tiny edges that you need to be capitalizing on. So knowing when to go bigger on a trade and knowing when to go smaller on a trade. And it's a general rule of thumb, like the more things that align here, the bigger you should probably go, but obviously not financial advice. Do your own version of this as well. And the less boxes that you tick, usually the lower you will size. And then going a bit deeper, I have blanket sizing rules around low caps, high risk coins, mid caps, and large caps. So that will change how I size into a coin, even notwithstanding the information that we've put together here. So that's my ultimate guide on making sure that you're in the right altcoins. It's quite in depth, but to be honest, you have a lot of time now. So in markets like this, where there aren't that many new opportunities, I would be using this time to make sure that your current portfolio is really, really well optimized, and that your potential prospective entries in the future are really, really well researched. There's no excuse, because now you have a bunch of time. I totally get it in the craziness of a bull that you might not have that much time to research, dive deep, and actually study things because things are crazy. But in this market especially, you can really plant the seeds and set yourself up for success in the next phase of the market. So I'll leave a link in the description to the Telegram, which will have the resources that I talked about today. And I hope you enjoyed the video overall. Let me know in the comments if you enjoy content like this and I can do more of it. And if there's an element here that you liked, that you want me to go deeper on, I can even do a specific deep dive on any of these platforms. Like, to be honest, I could do an hour on just DeFi Llama. I could do an hour on just Nansen. But I just wanted to give you a comprehensive overview today, and then we can dive deeper later. So Thank you guys for watching. Have a lovely weekend. I'll see you in the next one. Peace out.